Good day and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about Bloodstone, a 1975 novel published by Karl Wagner. This is, depending on how you look at it, the first or second of the three Kane novels that are published. There's also three collections of short stories. Um, as a book written, so Karl Wagner is someone who was heavily influenced by the works of Robert Howard. Conan the Barbarian is one you might be familiar with. And he was very into 30s style pulp fiction, and his writing reflects that. Um, Bloodstone itself and Kane himself tend to have darker or more horror elements in them. Um, so it's not really basic sword and sorcery, but it certainly does have reads a lot like sword and sorcery. Bloodstone is the story of Cain, and Cain is one of the first children created by a mad god in an experiment. And after the elder races had mostly left the earth, a mad god created man, and Cain introduced murder to men, and as a result was cursed by the creator to wander the earth forever, never aging and never dying until such time as he was killed by the violence that he had created. Um, Overall, the books themselves are pretty simple. Cain, in addition to being a very physically adept person, is also a accomplished sorcerer and very intelligent. So he does give the appearance of being, a Superman wandering amongst mortal men. But on the other hand, he's had thousands of years to sharpen his knowledge and learn. It doesn't really, the story obviously doesn't really get into deep questions of, how do you keep your brain sharp after an infinite number of years or thousands of years. So, is it believable? I mean, I suppose it's as believable as anything is. One of the interesting things about this is because he's immortal, um, the books themselves don't really, they're not set near the same time. There'll be one book set, and then the next book will come in and it's 500 years later, and you might see some events from the original book. Um, But overall, are the stories fun to read? Yeah, absolutely. They're absolutely fun to read. They're books that you can just sit and read through, and you'll reach the end of the book and say that was a fun experience. They're not really as being based on pulp fiction. They're not really the most deep or intellectually stimulating novels. I know I got into discussions. I want to say it was on a mailing list in the 90s where someone referred to Kane as Thud and Blunder, which is, play on Blood and Thunder. Okay, that's fair. They are not very deep intellectual books. They're just books that are fun to read. Now, again, bearing in mind they do have horror elements to them, so there are certainly, some things that people might dislike. And as books written in the 70s, they don't really have the best attitude towards women of any of the books that you will read. Um, but overall, they're enjoyable to read. They're not like really horrifying horror. There are elements of horror. There is evil in the world um, that periodically attempts to overcome man, and men have to fight back against it. It's common in the books. In Bloodstone, Cain is trying to restore the Bloodstone, which is an artifact of an elder race, which it was an artifact of an elder race used to uh, give them power, and then they ended up being enslaved by it. And then in the end, they did finally manage to shut the Bloodstone off, and the Elder race degenerated, and they now live in a swamp that people don't go into. And so Cain has discovered the secret of the Bloodstone, and he's attempting to restore it, and hoping that he will not be enslaved by it, but instead use it to uh, gain his powers. And in the process of doing that, he's also uh, pitting two nations against each other that live near the swamp to try and lull their suspicions while he can gain his power. So it's a pretty simple book, fun to read. In the sense not fun like you laugh at it and come out and say, "Wow, what a cheerful, happy book," but enjoyable to read. So I would recommend reading Cain if you think that that's the kind of thing that you'd like, and if not, don't. As always, thank you for listening this long, and I will talk to you again later.